Welcome to Decentralized On, where lifelong friends Chicago and Disco navigate the ever-evolving crypto landscape. With genuine curiosity and a commitment to nuance as our North Star, we offer clear-eyed exploration. Our goal? To empower listeners with the tools and insights needed to flourish in this decentralized age. All right, well, this is certainly a different sort of show and very exciting. We were able to connect with Dr. G, and actually Dr. G responded to something that we said in our last episode, which was encouraging folks who are listening, if there's any topics that we should cover, and like a alarm bell went off, and he was like, have you guys looked at kind of the decentralized AI, looked at everything through that lens? And I'm so glad that we connected because ever since, Dr. G kind of brought that up, we were like, oh my gosh, there's so much to dig into there. And, we've spent a couple days just trying to learn up a little bit and get into that headspace. So we're really excited today to be able to sit down with Dr. G and kind of dissect some of the recent developments and kind of get a feel for kind of the general state of AI overall, and specifically, kind of this battle that it may be in the middle of in terms of becoming centralized and hoping that it can stay more decentralized, and seeing how, some of the recent events from a political perspective. Was a recent executive order that kind of got everybody a little concerned in terms of, how this is all going to land and where we're going to end up in this. So that's kind of the background here. And we wanted to, introduce everybody to Dr. G. Dr. G, if you want to just say a few words to our audience, and we'll start cooking.
Sounds great. Yeah. Thanks guys for having me. It's pretty exciting to see the quick turnaround time from being sort of listener, like saying like, hey, I have an idea, to being on the show. So yeah, appreciate you guys having me.
We put you to the front of the list, the very long exclusive list.
Yeah.
There's not a ton of layers, so that's good.
Hey, keep the illusion going.
Yep. So, hey everyone, I'm Dr. G. I kind of split my time between the AI space and the sort of Bitcoin crypto space. So I've been working in AI in the TradFi space for a little under 10 years now. And so essentially, before we called it AI, it was machine learning. Before that, it was data science and
neural networks and all that stuff.
Yep. And way back when, it was just, plain old statistics. And so I've kind of gotten to see the evolution of that in the fintech space, and kind of drive some of the evolution there, specifically within the lending space. And that was, initially what led me to Ordinals was I was kind of building out my own project to do a little bit of on-chain lending using AI, kind of in a maybe better way than what can be done with the traditional financial rails, because you've got all that blockchain data there, and said, okay, well, this seems like a great use case for AI. And then made a loan to someone who had collateralized an ordinal within a wrapper on ETH, and then they defaulted. And so I took possession of the ordinal, found the community, the ordinal punk community, and was blown away and said, okay, I want to be a part of this. And so sort of stumbled my way into ordinals, and that's how
Wait, you got an ordinal punk through this collateralized loan?
Yes. Yeah.
So kidding. Okay.
Yeah. And so at the time, so now there are native lending solutions. I wouldn't necessarily recommend them to anyone as a borrower today, just because.
You mean I shouldn't leverage my Bitcoin JPEGs to 100x?
The APRs are triple digits, I think. There's a new protocol called Liquidium, and I've been playing around as a lender a little bit because triple digit APRs are appealing from that side. But like as a borrower, it's like, no, this is crazy. But at the time, it was someone I had lent to in the ETH NFT space a bit. And so he took his ordinal, wrapped it up in this thing called an emblem vault, which essentially allows you.
I've heard of Emblem.
Yeah. And so borrowed against the emblem vault on ETH, sort of at a lower interest rate than the ones you can get on sort of Bitcoin. Defaulted and had to unwrap the vault and took possession of the ordinal, and yeah, that was my first ordinal punk, and now I think I've got 3 of them, just because they grew on me as I was in the community.
Oh wow, yeah, I love my ordinal punk too. The Burger King hat and the blue face. So Did you get into AI and whatever the iterations were before AI, before crypto and Bitcoin?
Yes. Yeah.
You've got to be one of the first. Like, I would think it almost like the Bitcoin and crypto folks would naturally find their ways to AI, and you've been in the AI back channels for just under 10 years, and you're coming into crypto from the entirely opposite side. Oh my God, this is fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, depending on whether you're in, which way you want to frame it, it's either like made the jump from AI to crypto at exactly the time the world was doing the opposite, or zigging when the world zags, sort of thing. So yeah,
Wow. So you just got into Bitcoin specifically in ordinals in the last, well, I mean, ordinals is only since February. So in the last like 8 or 9 months.
So ordinals, yeah, in the last 8 or 9 months, I got into crypto, and then I sort of drifted towards Bitcoin more and more. Maybe starting in that like 2020 period when
Okay.
I had too much time on my hands,
Like all of
decided
us.
to revisit the like conclusion I'd drawn in 2016 when everyone was telling me about Bitcoin when it first hit 20K. I was like, this is a scam. I don't believe it. And so kind of questioning some of those assumptions and said, oh, there's something here. Got big into the DeFi space and
Yep.
then NFTs and NFT lending and having experienced the come down in 2021, sort of like started to become more sympathetic to some of the more traditional Bitcoin, maybe not full on maxi, but sort of maxi sympathetic in terms of where do I want to hold significant wealth versus play
Right.
want to have fun.
So when you came in, were you, was it more Ethereum? Like you weren't Cardano, Solana, and all the other stuff out there, were you?
Yeah, it was almost entirely Ethereum. I played
Okay.
around a little on Solana with DGods and then Utes sort of thing, but then they bridged over to Ethereum anyway. So
Right.
it was primarily Ethereum, and I still play around a lot on Ethereum. I think very cool stuff is being built there, and I almost view that as that's sort of the chain on which fun, interesting projects can be built, even if like it's not clear to me that it's decentralized enough to last another 30 or 40 years like Bitcoin would be. But in the meantime, let's build fun stuff and figure it out. In the same way that
Interesting. Because a
I
lot of people call, a lot of Bitcoiners and Ordinals folks are now calling ETH testnet. And that's exactly what you just said. Just to lay the foundation before we get into the AI stuff, why do you think Ethereum is so much less secure than Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think it's essentially just maybe the complexity and the sort of the need to have a much more complicated sort of like staking validator model, and the fact that Vitalik is a person that theoretically a nation state could come after, and so I think although I admire the strides they've made toward decentralization, I think some combination of the technical complexity and the proof of stake model just means that like strange or sort of like edge cases crop up, Lido owning more and more of the stake
Yeah.
market,
Yeah.
things like that, like,
32% now. Yeah.
yeah, most of the time it works, but like if a nation state or a group of nation states decided to really crack down on it, like could it come out the other side? It's less clear to me than the Bitcoin case.
So
And so
you're saying like crack down on like the EVMs that are there's the OLFAC compliant and the non-OLFAC compliant blocks. You're saying enough pressure on the right team members and enough threats. You're saying the EVM could be upgraded or downgraded to be corrupted by the nation states.
yeah, and it's
Interesting.
some combination of like the unknown unknowns there. Like if I try to model it like on a multi-decade timeline, it's just like all the different attack surfaces that it could have, things like that. It's like just hard for me to have that like 99.999% confidence that it would make it through all the possible attacks that people could think up over that time period, compared to Bitcoin.
So you don't think Ethereum's had enough of those attack vectors tested, whereas Bitcoin is far more hardened, just being 5 years older, and the technology is simpler and obviously entirely different, being more UTXO versus kind of account based.
Yeah, and that simplicity I think is the key part. It just like
Interesting.
greatly reduces the surface space for attacks. I think
Huh.
it means it's a lot harder to build cool stuff, and I
Yeah.
think cool things, if ETH is testnet, like ordinals wouldn't exist probably without NFTs kind of paving the way there. And so
Right.
all this to say, like I hold ETH and very supportive of the things being done there. It's just like, if I think of like, what am I leaving to my kids and future generations? Like, I'm pretty confident Bitcoin will still be around. I hope ETH is still around, because that probably implies some like, uh, more favorable sort of like that's a favorable outcome, one that I hope for, but am not willing to bank on, I guess.
So you're not worried about Bitcoin and mining rewards going down and security budget there. Those arguments aren't valid for you, or you're more like Bitcoin's got 100 years to kind of figure this out until the piggy bank goes dry.
Yeah, more the latter. I think that is a real problem. I think it's just like, yeah, 100 years is a long time to figure that out. And uh, yeah, at least that's like 10 or so decades away, as opposed to like 2 to 3 for like Ethereum risk cropping up.
Hmm. Interesting. Well, that's a good foundation for kind of jumping into AI. So, Disco, where should we start? I guess let's do an overview of who the players are, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's great to be able to have someone who's kind of come up in more of the AI centric space, right? And for us, just kind of, if you could give us, and I know this is going to be kind of difficult, but is there any way you could give us kind of a general state of where it's at right now, with a kind of emphasis, a sub emphasis, if you will, on kind of the centralized players as opposed to the decentralized players? Because some of the stuff that I was reading through was just riveting in terms of, wow, and we're always going back to that battle and thesis of, can we really create a decentralized future?
Right.
And with a lot of this, it's kind of where it is. So anything you could speak to on that would be really helpful.
Yeah, yeah. So it's kind of funny because in terms of AI entering the sort of like public sphere, it's a pretty recent phenomenon. I think the big aha moment where sort of folks outside the space really woke up was the release of Chat GPT by OpenAI. Uh, yeah, a company started as a nonprofit to be OpenAI, and that's certainly a subject of debate.
Ah, I didn't know that. So at first, and then they saw the dollar signs, like, oh my gosh, we are literally sitting on the next mega, 100x unicorn.
Yeah, and they've still to this day got kind of a complicated corporate structure where there is still a nonprofit involved, and there are like capped profits, and Microsoft owns part of it. Uh, I think they maybe like OpenAI would try to tell you with a straight face that they are still a nonprofit, even though large parts of the entity are very very much for profit, and Microsoft is making plenty of money off this.
A nonprofit as their mega yacht goes by your dinghy, like.
Yeah,
And Microsoft they're like a 49% owner. They're just under majority, correct?
yeah. I'm not sure the exact percentage, but they
It's
own
high, I
quite
know.
a bit. Yep, yep.
And because you go into Bing now, and Bing was always like, the the laughing stock of search engines.
Search.
I guess everything kind of was, unfortunately, to Google, but now Bing is, they're kind of putting stuff out in these cards, and it's obviously far more helpful. I don't know if I love exactly, but they'll evolve with it, and this partnership has reaping rewards, I assume, on every front for them.
Yeah, and it's funny because I do think that like the integration with Bing has helped them catch up with Google a little bit. At least it's like there's a piece of you that thinks like, hey, maybe I should use Bing because it's got these plugins, and the GPT models that power these tools. The T there stands for transformer, which
Okay.
is based on research that came out of Google in 2016, and so Google actually kind of came up with the almost like the primitive, I guess you could think of it, that powers these models, and uh, depending on who you ask, failed to capitalize on it, or kept it internal because like, don't rock the boat, these things are scary, whatever. And so
Right.
so you sort of like had this like research group that produced very innovative work but failed to capitalize on it, and then now their sort of search engine and their browser is uh, you know getting a lot more competition from a competitor who built on top of that, which has been pretty interesting.
And basically, like, from what I could see, like Microsoft kind of, you know, jumped in with OpenAI and really kind of, you know, wanted to do the ribbon cutting for, you know, hey, it's here and we got this. Whereas it seemed like Google was kind of, you know, they have, you know, insane amounts of data and everything that they can be doing and they've been developing. But it almost felt to me like they were like, okay, run and take the, you know, you could be the first one to dive in the pool and we'll see how deep it really is and what's going on. So I don't think necessarily that, you know, Microsoft is the one that's going to end up on top down the road for sure. But it was interesting that they just clawed that out and just ran with it.
I thought Google was caught quite flat-footed. Dr. G, you probably know better than both of us. What, like, I feel like they're playing catch up now, and obviously with Google search, they have like their data is theirs and it's not going anywhere. So which one is kind of more accurate, do you think, or is it tough to know?
Yeah, my sense is that internally, Google's tools are as good, maybe even better. Like I think they've had
And
pretty.
that's called Bard, right? Google
Bard
Bard.
is kind of the public-facing version of
Okay,
it.
that's what the name. Okay.
Yeah, and the reason I think these internal tools are probably better than what gets released to the world is you've got this sort of asymmetry in terms of the like risk reward, and maybe a useful analogy is like when you see a Tesla self-driving car and it strikes a pedestrian, and when that happens, it makes news and it's a PR
Right.
disaster. Even if it's 10 times safer than a human driver, it's still like people want to focus
Right.
on when the machine makes
The
the
one
mistake.
time it hit the person, right?
Exactly. And so
When people are drunk, getting in accidents and texting, getting in accidents a day and killing people.
Yep. And I think you've got something similar there with like releasing these AI tools where they're good, they're mind blowing, they are imperfect. They will often do, give you false information. It's known as hallucinating, where I think some lawyers got in trouble recently for like writing a legal brief using chat gpt and it cited non-existent cases, and it's like this is an easily provable thing, and
It's
they
like a
were like,
Dungeons and Dragons module where, like, I think,
yeah,
yeah,
they
I
were
don't
like
think that happened. I don't think
they were
Middle
dis-
Earth is qualifies for this legal case.
yeah, and so they were disbarred for this, and so I think there's a
Oh
real
God.
because those mistakes happen. I think from Google's perspective, it's like until we can get these from 5% of the time to sub 1%, we're not going to risk it and release this out to the public. We'll use it for internal
Right.
things, and as long as we've got it internally, then like our developers and sort of like folks at the company know when to trust it and not, and how to use it safely. But you can't trust your average end consumer to use the tool in the way you intend it, sort of thing. And so I think there was some risk aversion there. And then when like the chat gpt comes out and they see all this progress on OpenAI, then there was a little bit of like rush to try to get something out to the public. And that's why you see these like flat-footed attempts like Bard, where it's like, well, we need to release something.
Something, right?
Let's like sort of like get it out there as quickly as possible, and like maybe sand off all the rough edges so that it's low risk, but there's not a free lunch there, I guess.
Got it. Yeah, it's like Gronk all of a sudden. He's like, and Gronk, after he's been saying that AI was going to like, paper clip us and,
Yeah.
and, just destroy humanity. And then Disco and I were talking about this the other day. Do you think that Elon truly was scared of what AI could do? Or do you think he was trying to get the government to be scared to buy him time to get in the game faster?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think so. So I just finished the Walter Isaacson biography of Elon Musk, and so in that it talks about his early days at OpenAI. So he was actually an investor early on and very frustrated with
Oh, I didn't know that.
yeah, the Google co-founders not taking this risk seriously enough, and so at least that biography portrays him as being
Okay.
very worried about it very early, and then sort of like breaking ties with OpenAI when they stopped being open and dropping the nonprofit piece. So my sense
So
is
Elon kind of took the high road there, it appears, or that's what this book says, right?
yeah, that's what the book says, and that's the sort of post hoc explanation.
Okay.
I think there's probably some truth to it, but it also does sort of conveniently buy him some time to roll some of these things
Right.
out. So my sense is he's maybe like playing multi-dimensional chess there, and it's like a little bit of both kind of thing.
Right.
But he does like to kind of lay claim to putting together the initial OpenAI team, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I've seen that multiple times where he's like, I kind of got this group together and let this thing, kind of birth it to a degree. So he does have some credit taking there.
God,
Yep.
Elon, the guy's had his fingers in everything. It's just incredible. That
I know
I,
they said a couple days ago they announced that they're a big production company is making that book into the movie. So it's kind of interesting to see who's going to play him and how they're going to try to tackle that biop.
So
Yeah.
okay, so we've got the centralized player. So the elephant in the chicken yard right now is OpenAI. We got Microsoft owning part of that and using Bing to draft off it. So we're seeing it more and more. But obviously with OpenAI and Dolly, like they are iterating at just breakneck speed. Every time you open the app, you're like, oh, I can do images. Like the other day, my son had I'm good at math, but the way they're learning math now is different than when we grew up. And this, I was like, how do I explain it to him? Because half the time I explain it, I have 9 shortcuts built into my brain, screw him up. He was like, Dad, this is not how they even teach it. So I took a picture. I'm like, ChatGPT, please help. And it was like, actually, and because they were their honors geometry proofs, because I didn't want to skip a step. It's like, and it was a fill in the blank and it filled them all in. I'm like, there you go, and don't use ChatGPT at school, son, which obviously I did not say, but okay. So you got OpenAI, you got Google Bard, you got Elon's Grok, which is more of a like, I heard the training hours for that one is like 1/1 millionth of what these other guys have. So he's literally like throwing stuff on the wall to say, I'm here. Are there any other big centralized players worth mentioning?
Yeah, I think the other one is Meta, Facebook. Definitely worth mentioning there. They've got their Llama model. For quite a while, they've done AI kind of in the computer vision space. I think it can be seen in something as simple as like when you upload a photo, it knows like, hey, this is this other person kind of thing, facial recognition, things like that. And so
Yeah.
they have been doing that in terms of like how to sort of analyze sentiment of your post and figure out what to show you in the feed and all that stuff. What was really interesting about this Llama model, rewind maybe 6 to 9 months ago, getting access to one of these models as a sort of machine learning practitioner, so not an end user, is quite difficult. So you can query, instead of using the chat GPT interface, you can query an API and get access to the outputs of the model. But those actual weights and parameters that
Right.
govern the model, those are lock and key, secured and not made available. Um, so
And this is for Llama, OpenAI, Bard. All of these are black box.
so Llama is different, and Meta, Facebook made the decision to um, allow access to these weights for researchers. So you would have to fill out a form saying like who you
Hmm.
are, and they would give you access to the raw weights of the model, and so that was still somewhat gated, but as long as you were plausibly someone who worked in the field or research or academic, you could pretty easily get access to this as
Okay.
long as you just long enough. So someone took that and put the weights up on BitTorrent, and then so suddenly they were available, basically forever to anyone who wanted them.
Phil
And
Zimmerman's grandchild or
yeah,
something.
yep. All sorts of speculation or conspiracy theories around like how intentional this was, or whether Meta
Oh,
foresaw
okay.
this. But it's turned out, in my opinion, to be quite a brilliant decision, because most of the open source folks who are building now build on Llama because it's sort of viewed as one of the better open source models that's out there. And so it's still not as good as the GPT models, but you can like do what's known as fine tuning and kind of craft it to be specific to your data, and do that very easily because they've given you the almost like the sort of like source code in some ways, or the source parameters, I guess you can think.
So basically, either by intent or by default, Meta, aka Llama, could potentially be, kind of pioneering on the decentralized side of it by releasing it open source, right?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. And
Wow.
you've had this tremendous community come in and build things on top of it. And so uh, the evolution of GPT is fascinating and breakneck. You see an update every week or so. But
Right.
on Llama, it's even faster because the same reason open source works elsewhere. You just like anyone can hop in and make an improvement and their own use case and stuff. And so that's been pretty fascinating to see things getting built on top of that recently.
So for Llama, those weightings and improvements that people are making open source, does Meta Facebook actually then use that back in their Facebook, Instagram ecosystem? Or no, they still have kind of their separate cordoned off where they're tweaking all those controls separately?
Yeah, I think they use pieces of it, like parts of it. So depending on what the improvement is, they're
Right.
able to borrow, especially if it's like, a deep technical improvement where it's just like, hey, this runs the exact same thing we had before, but 20% faster. So I think many of the things getting built on top of that are being directly used by Meta. And often it's just like, hey, here's a cool use case. Why don't we do that? But like, tailor it to whatever Meta's problem is or whatever.
So this is almost helping them probably iterate and get fresh ideas faster. It's like the internet was started for, nuclear preparement, to have the government be able to communicate with itself. And then obviously, they could or probably couldn't imagine all the stuff that commercial would do with it. It sounds like Meta could benefit from this as well. And for once look like the good guy. I mean, like who I don't love Mark Zuckerberg. I don't think many people do because a lot of us grew up with Facebook and like in Illinois, they collected, we actually all got checks who submitted in the class action suit. I think we all got like $400 because they did facial recognition on everybody. But Illinois and I think one other random state have no facial recognition policies. I can't believe Illinois, like the least tech savvy state. I don't know where that came from or how it happened, but I got a check for $400 and now my image is recognizable everywhere on the planet, I guess, like the rest of us. But it's just so hard to trust, Mark, and what they're doing. But it sounds like you're saying, well, open source is open source. The trust doesn't even matter because people off these weightings are benefiting. And if Facebook closes off, it sounds like you're saying, well, what's open is still open, and that can be built on, it can be forked, if you will, and just expanded from there. Is that a fair assessment?
I think so, yeah. And the only caveat there, and this gets a little bit into the technical details, but when you build one of these models, you're often training the base layer weights. So this is a sort of a fancy neural net built
Right.
on reams and reams of data, and they give you your base weights. And this is not a super useful thing unless you're literally trying to do text completion, like start a sentence and then have the model finish that sentence. So what people then do is to do what's known as fine tuning, where you train it to be a chatbot. And so you literally take this raw thing with weights, feed it a specific prompt that's like computer says this, user says this, and then feed a bunch of examples like that. And in fact, when you use Chat GPT, you're helping train the next set of models because they can see, wait, did he like that the way I responded? Like, what was the feedback there? And so, what Meta has open sourced are those weights that are the output of that initial training. In that initial training, there are still some like centralized decisions that have to be made around like, what to include or not. Like, what content is fair grounds for being included here, and there are some censorship decisions, I guess, that Meta can still make at that base level pre-weights that can, I guess, subtly affect the algorithm and make it not like truly 100% open source, but sort of the closest thing we've got to it, at least as far as like large centralized entities go. And
Wow.
I maybe like highlight that to contrast it with smaller entities that are doing truly open source, like uncensored. There's actually a French company called Mistral, and they've been in the news a bit because they're presenting this very tough conundrum for like the EU as they try to regulate AI and sort of like what is acceptable speech and all those things, where Mistral has basically staked its claim as like being the uncensored, like unfiltered AI, and maybe like sort of like what Grok says it's doing, but really doing that. And because there are relatively few successful like French or even European tech companies, the regulators find themselves in kind of a bind because like, well, we don't want to pull one of our like.
It's the only one we have that's even remotely got a chance of competing with these juggernauts.
Yeah, and so there are maybe like that's sort of a long-winded way of saying there are levels to the amount of decentralization, and of the big guys, Meta is probably furthest along that, and then you've got a lot of other sort of like grassroots or smaller projects that are even more fully decentralized than the big incumbent players. Yeah.
I have a question that, just looking at all this stuff, it's been in my head and I'm trying to figure it out. So out of the groups, I think that was a pretty good overview of kind of the centralized players, and we haven't really gotten into all the different, more decentralized open sourcey options that are developing. But who is standing to gain the most by this, kind of fear mongering to a degree, and kind of the doomerist stuff, and all this. I read that Myth of the Superhuman AI article and it just really set me off and started really thinking. But like, who's benefiting from this? That the world's going to be taken over and we're going to lose everything, because it seems like there's a pretty solid motivation to really push that messaging out, and I'm just wondering what the strategy behind that is.
Yeah, good question. I think that there are a few types of entities that stand to benefit. First and foremost would be like OpenAI, the big centralized players. Like I think you saw that with the founder Sam Altman like proactively going and testifying in front of Congress. Like I think this was pretty transparently like getting out in front of like regulatory capture, or getting out in front of this to create regulatory capture. Like I think they stand to benefit immensely from this.
Yeah. So like on on May 4th, when they had the White House meeting with the CEOs, it was Sam Altman, it was Dario from Anthropic, and Microsoft CEO and Google CEO, and it's like, so those are like we got to understand their motivations when they're sitting in these rooms, and ultimately leading to potential legislation or executive orders and things like that. So it's just kind of, I'm really trying to understand what's motivating these folks and how they're kind of positioning things.
Yeah. I think maybe the other like type of entity that stands to benefit is maybe in the same way that like some politicians have, taken, in my opinion, the short-sighted approach of playing crypto Bitcoin fear, playing on that fear to swoop in and save their constituents in the name of protection. Like I think fear creates an opportunity for politicians, and certainly I've seen a lot of that with like hey, this thing's gonna come kill you, I'll save you, elect me.
Don't you think they're protecting the crypto side, the government is, because they know if you have full off ramps, either not high inflation or almost deflationary off ramps to the inflationary dollar, like there's no monetary control there.
Yeah. There's a certain loss of control that I think terrifies them. Like you can't imagine a world where like the small number of U.S. Bureaucrats like control everything, and that's terrifying to them, I think.
Yeah, and it feels like it's kind of slowly happening there. Like the fact that AI is, it's been around, like you said, for years and years under different names, but now the front-facing use case has just become so obvious. I guess ChatGPT 3 was probably the one where the meteor, like the hockey stick, just came and people realized, holy crap, can this save me a lot of time and brainstorming and writing marketing content and a million other things, right? So Disco, where do we want to go from here? Like, we've established the centralized players, which I think is absolutely key. He's touched on some of the decentralized. It sounds like it's almost more nuanced, like like Llama, I was almost like, save it for the second part of the decentralized show, but you're saying, well, it's murky because it started out centralized, it went more decentralized. There's some stuff in the black box early that could be weighted where Facebook could censor stuff out, but the way it's headed and the way it's going, especially with these weightings, has opened it up for people and has really given at least a head start, whether you build on Llama or build outside of that. You can look at that to kind of at least like look at a model. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. Yep.
Okay.
We were shared some information about like how Bitcoin could really play a role in, interfacing potentially with Lightning and Nostr, and that being kind of like a triumvirate that could really work well together and, kind of represent a different way to go about it than what we're seeing from the more, established centralized situations. Can you maybe speak a little bit to kind of the potential of that coming together and working together?
Yeah, absolutely. And so one question you might have is, okay, so why is it so? What is the bottleneck in getting these weights? Like if we say that like even these weights and kind of the more open source centralized players can be subtly influenced or censored, like why doesn't everyone just get get their own set of weights? And essentially that is bottlenecked by compute power, specifically GPUs. So most of these models use the same graphics processor that you would use to play video games on. Maybe like not so different from early days of crypto mining before ASICs became the
right.
thing. So there are a couple limitations there. Like those are expensive, and because of all the excitement around AI, even getting one, assuming you're willing to pay, is a many months long ordeal. And so you sort of see many new AI startups getting funded, plumping down like most of their VC money just to buy GPUs, and then being at the mercy of NVIDIA or like one of these bigger companies 6 to 9 months to even take physical possession of the GPUs to then start working. And so you've got this real, I think, bottleneck of computational power to process that data. And so I think where Bitcoin gets exciting, or the Lightning Network specifically, or maybe even crypto more generally, is
Sure.
It gives you a sort of an internet native way of paying for things, right? In a very permissionless, like automated way. And so what you can do, and I think there's some early efforts in this vein, is say, hey, you're like not using your computer right now. Let me rent your GPU. Like maybe in the same way that like the last crypto bull market, we saw some of this with file storage, like Filecoin and Arweave, and some of these solutions that said like, you're not using all that hard disk. That thing goes to waste. Why don't you earn a couple pennies just renting out your storage space? You're seeing something like that for GPU processing power specifically. And I think that's you need internet native money to be able to pay the people, but both like let the people who are using it pay, and then pay the people who are giving you that compute power.
Is that kind of what GP Utopia is working at?
Yeah. So they are specifically. So my understanding of where they are today is, so you've got two very compute intensive steps. There's the training of the model, and then actually running the model. Like it's actually surprisingly expensive for GPT to run on OpenAI servers when you ask it a query. And so they've made it very easy to just like hook up your Lightning wallet. Say, here, you can use my GPU to process queries that are coming in. So not necessarily to train a base level model, but to process the queries that are coming in, and I'll earn 7 sats a model call, I think is what it is. And so it's like, so they don't have to go to a big centralized service like AWS, Amazon Web Services, or Microsoft to rent the computers out. They can just run it on anyone's machine who decides to participate in this.
Do you think this model is, Filecoin and Arweave and storage? Arweave has certainly found a product market fit. I think Filecoin has with IPFS. Do you think this is like perfect product market fit no brainer, or does Bitcoin being kind of the first cryptocurrency with, a much simpler and more secure architecture pose a lot of issues for this?
Yeah, I think the answer really is it depends. So I think the answer today is no, it's not perfect product market fit. So using this requires you to like know that there's a problem with chat gpt, that the centralization of this thing is a bug, not a feature.
Right.
Requires you to know a little bit about lightning, like buy some bitcoin, fund your lightning wallet. Like there are many steps to getting started with this. And so I think that the medium to long term answer really depends on what is the sort of regulatory response to AI, like how tightly regulated and how restrictive will the regulations be there, will kind of help determine how much of a sort of consumer demand is there for these products.
Right. And we know Congress haven't been passing many things at all because nobody can agree on anything. So we had an executive order from the White House, right? So can you summarize it? This executive order came from Joe Biden, who I assume knows next to nothing about, any of this AI stuff, even his vice president, like these guys. So someone behind them is pulling the strings saying, this is a bad thing. And maybe it was Altman and all these guys coming in and they formulated around that. But I suspect there's probably, like you said, with this regulatory capture, who benefits? The early big behemoth corporate movers and probably the government, right? So both win. Could you walk us through a little this executive order and what it meant and why obviously a lot of people in your space were so angry?
Yeah, and I do think it's very much kind of influenced from the fear side of things. Like maybe one other point to make in terms of like who are they listening to? I think the crypto space has learned this lesson, painfully, but definitely learned it. But the AI space maybe not so much, which is you've got a group of people busy building the newest, most exciting technology, heads down, not talking much or marketing what they're doing. And then you've got the people spreading fear about it, who are purely focused on messaging and getting the fear out there, sort of thing. And so I do think that both because of the incumbents who benefit from it and just the overall fear level within the country, this executive order is very much of the opinion like this is a scary thing that we need to slow down a little bit and figure out what's going on, kind of thing. Um, and and so I would at a high level describe this executive order as sort of saying, hey, maybe not everyone in government, but a dozen or so different regulatory bodies, you all need to figure out what's going on with this AI stuff. And so in some cases, this is very much just like, look at this, check for problems, where problems may be left at
Right.
like, look for problems, or they could be more specific. Like I think some of the stuff around like lending and redlining and a lot of like, hey, we've seen historical problems in various areas, and that has, in the government's eyes, justified the creation of these regulatory bodies. Hey, look and see if those problems you're there to solve are going to crop up through AI, and report back to us. And so I think the
Right.
most charitable interpretation of this is
Man.
like, this is a nothing burger. The executive order
Thank you.
just says, look and see what's going on and report back, and nothing will happen. But I think some of the language really scared folks in the industry, because I mean it's very, very granular in terms of like, if you are essentially running a model, running computation at too many exaflops, which is essentially just like how many computations can you do per second. Like if you get above some magic threshold,
It was 10 to the 26th exaflops, right? Or something
yeah,
crazy
Yeah,
like
the
that.
integer.
Yeah.
yeah. And so it's some number that like
Oh, yeah.
sounds huge today and is probably like, if that gets codified into law, next thing you know, like 10
6
years from now,
megs.
we all have that on our cell phones, and it's just like, wait, what? The government like gets to know everything, like,
Do you
and
think
so
this is kind of a Trojan horse to just like keeping the surveillance alive?
Yeah, I do. I do think that there's like real fear that like these AI models, especially if everyone's kind of got their own, customized AI model that is like fine tuned on their own data, their own use case, that there's a real like censoring or surveilling that is going to be next to impossible. And so I think it at the very least is like preserving the option of more surveillance in the future if the powers that be decide that's necessary.
But it's almost the way it was positioned. It's almost like come back and find something, and we'll include it. So it's almost like trying to open it up for as much as possible. To be kind of potentially railed in or reeled in under this as the umbrella. That was kind of my take on it, where it's just like a kind of a splatter shot for everybody, like, and it could be this and it could be this, and you see kind of the political side of it in there of like, oh, and protecting jobs, like that's going to be so politicized out of this so quickly, like, well, we must stop that because look at and it's like, so just in looking at it, it seems really dangerously vague and all encompassing to a degree, because when they defined AI as a machine-based system that can, for a given set of human-defined objectives, makes predictions, recommendations, or decisions influencing real or virtual environments, that kind of just means technology.
It sounds like the internet to me.
Absolutely.
That's like an
Or
algorithm,
any video game, or anything,
or an algorithm if you think about it. Like, so it's,
Right.
that's. And
Like-
I mean, even worse, it's just math at the end of the day. Like that
Yeah.
exaflop regulation is like you can only do so much math per second, and like, wait, how are in the same way that like how are you going to stop me from like remembering my seed phrase or like how are you going to stop me from doing too much math per second? Like that's crazy. And
no
I do
more
think,
memorizing shit.
yeah, it's
it's
it
basically
very much
don't
does
get
feel
too
like
good at it.
a guilty until proven innocent sort of approach where it's like, well, we know there are problems, go find as many as you can and tell us, and we'll regulate it, as opposed to like, I think there's like one minor paragraph there of like, make sure that the US stays the leader in this, like, yeah, whatever, like we want to stay at the forefront, but like solve all these problems too. That's the main thrust of it.
Well, and the government solving anything, especially like there's three people on this call who are all fairly technically savvy and who are into this stuff. You obviously know infinitely more than we do, but to have the government wrap their heads around it, they're not going to be able to. So then what are you going to get? You're going to get the experts. Oh, gee, where do the experts come from? Like, it's just the same.
Centralized powers that be. Like,
Or just the lobby and the big companies that have the lobby be like, oh, don't worry, I got this. I'll write this for you. It's like, I love that story of, I think it was like Harvard Medical School or something, or one of the big universities back in the 30s. They wrote this whole thing on how great sugar was, and like, sugar's good for you. It's really good for you. And they when they finally found the files of all the backstory to it, it was like, oh, they were basically paid. And maybe it wasn't them. If it wasn't, I apologize, but it was a very renowned university saying the opposite. It's like 4 to 5 doctors recommend Marlboro. Like, really?
Was that an apology to sugar?
It wasn't an apology to sugar. It was an apology to some big $1 trillion annuity, think tank that could squash me like a bug. So it was hedging everywhere.
Yeah, and to this day, people like still think of like fat in food as being correlated with like fat in the body, and fat as being like unhealthy because of that exact like sugar industry lobbying. And so it's I think it's sad that this is a sort of like tale as old as time.
Yeah, and you have to figure out. I had a lot of health issues with asthma and allergies, and I just had to figure it out for myself and realize, like, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, like, oh, fat, very good. Fat, yeah. Like, especially for a tall, skinny bloke like me, it like gives me long-term energy, not this quick like Pop Rocks energy, where you're either taking more Pop Rocks and Coca-Cola, or you're taking a 14-hour nap because you're crashing from it. So,
yeah.
Wow. So the net at this point is that the executive order, is pretty generic and pretty big in scope, but there aren't really teeth in it in terms of, actionable, you're going to see XYZ results from this. It's more of kind of an open call to kind of get as many different, angles that they could potentially look to regulate, and then go to Congress for that side of it. And I mean, it isn't. I mean, obviously, this technology isn't specific just to America, and you have all the different countries trying to grapple with how they're going to operate in that. And I know that I read something where China's really super involved in developing it, and you can see how obviously it could be leveraged in ways that could be could be a little scary in some of that stuff. So it's not just like this total doomerist. It is like, well, authoritarian sort of regimes and stuff could certainly leverage and harness that. And I think that that's something to be kind of just alert about and kind of aware of, especially with the deep fakes and all these things happening. And we're looking at a presidential election in 11 months or so. So it's really a fertile mental topic to kind of dig into and think through. So
that's a good point. So do you think the election, with everything that's happened in the last 2 election cycles and the deep fakes, I totally didn't even think of that. Is that a big part of this major fear from obviously the party certainly in power, but just the whole Washington infrastructure?
Yeah, I do think it's a piece of it, in that, like, I mean, quote unquote misinformation or false fake news, whatever you want to call it, again, is a tale as old as time. But I think there's a real fear that that AI models like scale that so quickly. Like, it goes from, I've got to type this fake story up and sort of like get people excited, to like, let me just throw some GPU credits at this thing. And as long as like my fake news fits into the acceptable narrative so that I don't get canceled by my like cloud provider or whatever, then like I can pump out a 1,000 of these things a day. So I think there's a real concern about this. This allowing for that to scale up and again, like makes it harder to censor or surveil people. And so I do think this is like maybe a place where the sort of crypto community and the AI community can kind of like band together, where like as fakes and fake things get more prevalent, I think like probably our kids, or at least our grandkids, are going to start to question like everything that they see on a screen. It's like, how do I know that thing is true unless you've cryptographically proven you said it? And
right.
So yeah, I think you'll have it'll be a rough transition as we go to like, well, just because I said it, like that doesn't, I can't prove that this thing is true. I can only prove it's true that I said it. But then like you can build on top of that to establish like reputation layers and things like that I think will be cool, even if messy for a while.
That's a really good point. Go ahead, Disco.
Yeah. So potentially in a big picture, AI could end up being like one of the biggest use cases for crypto overall. So it's always been kind of out there, like it's going to somewhat, merge together and play very well together, and, kind of further both sides and kind of become, somewhat merged in a way. So just thinking from that side of it, it really would be able to legitimize things that wouldn't be able to be legitimized, because we're going into a world where critical thinking is probably the most important trait.
Critical, yeah.
Get, and being able to then say, okay, what's the source of this, and have it be, transparent, which is, the whole kind of promise of a blockchain era that we're going into. So it's exciting to look at how kind of the forces should merge together, and kind of really, especially from the regulation side, we should definitely be banding together and making sure all the voices are heard for kind of where things are headed.
Yeah. And that's like, having spent a little bit of time in the crypto community, like, and seeing like, things that Coin Center and different lobbying groups have done over time to kind of like get the word out there. And I think making real traction with, some political leaders, ton of work to still be done, but seeing the lessons learned there, I sort of look around at my like AI compatriots. I'm just like, whoa, like we need to like be working with them, copying their lessons. Like we're way behind in terms of the like, marketing and selling ourselves to the people who make decisions and the everyday consumer.
It's almost like OpenAI was so successful so fast a year ago in the public consciousness that the rest of you who have known each other for, a decade or so, who were building these models and the precursor to how all this came to be now, are like, oh wow, we were just thrust on stage, and now we've got to make sure that those of us who believe that the people and citizens need a bigger voice in this, and we're not just boxed out by the biggest hugest corporations who have to invest $1 billion as a startup just to like get the GPUs and to get the basic learning model set. It sounds like you guys were thrust a little sooner than you probably expected to be.
Yeah. And I think for those of us, doing the technical work, surrounded by technical people, I think there's often a little bit of a blind spot of like, how much does some of this like regulatory politics, like how much does the narrative matter versus like the thing I'm building is good and powerful and does good for the world. Like, I think that's a blind spot that many technologists have. And I think the crypto industry has like, learned that over time that like, hey, getting the word out really matters. And I think we'll get there with AI. It's just taking a little bit of time. And yeah, it's like this, if you'd asked me 2 years ago, yeah, that's a problem for like late 2020s. Like we'll get to it when we get to it after we've built enough cool stuff. And it's like, wait, somebody like just thrust us onto the stage. Exactly. Exactly like you said.
Yeah, and it's happening so fast. But I would also argue to a previous point you made about like why the executive order and why they're trying to crack down too is because the government, I think, beknownst or unbeknownst to us, has been controlling kind of the narrative, not every part of every story of every narrative, but certainly the ones that were most important to them. Social media changed that, but then they figured out, we learned with the Twitter papers, like, okay, how they can kind of clamp down on that stuff. And now with AI, like you said, it almost like one really smart human could have 100,000 AI bots figuring out that exact little, like how to reach this person and get through to him and her and over here, and just like they did for these last elections. And they're realizing, I think they're flailing a little trying to put where they control the narrative back in the box. And I think they're realizing that they can't, but and we can all kind of see under the curtain now, but they're just going to keep swinging until they kind of have that control and surveillance so the state can perpetuate the state and protect itself, right? It's like its own organism in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and so really the weight and the bottleneck that you were talking about is basically the barrier to entry, right? So all these companies are doing it, and then they have to like kind of wait in the queue to get the NVIDIA or whatever, the GPUs that they need to be able to operate. Whereas I guess from kind of a more crypto native or centric perspective, that's why these open source, kind of work together is in terms of Lightning Network and Nostr and, kind of finding that way to do it that really could represent a way to have a more decentralized, open sourced AI, ingrained into our culture moving forward. And it's kind of this battle because if it's a matter of the money to get the GPUs, Microsoft's got the money, so you have these incumbents that are going to stand to really benefit from that, whereas on the other side, if people can really get their act together and figure out how to make these things work better and be a little more user friendly and all that, that's always the knock, right? Like make it a little more user friendly, but we get to that point, then we could see a completely different outcome, which is one that I would be rooting for personally.
Yeah. It's essentially like, okay, none of us have these super powered GPUs that a Microsoft could buy, and not just because they've got the money, but like if you look at NVIDIA's stock price, it's you can't buy these things. They're back ordered. Even if you've got the money, it's like they've got the connections and all that to get them.
It's
But
almost like the ant miners and the like they run those things just dry, and then when they come out with the new ones, they sell you the ones they've been mining with, and if you can even get your hands on one and it's cost effective and you're making money for maybe 2 months until they flip the new ones on, you're like, oh. Yep. Yeah, okay, I'm using like 2 generations ago here.
Yeah. And so even if we can't get our hands on the equivalent of the ASICs, if we all sort of like have some coordinating mechanism, and I think crypto can provide this, such that like each of our GPUs can get hooked up together and combined to make that power, it'll be really powerful for creating either the AI or the set of AIs. Like I sort of think it to be more, one common vision of the doom scenario is that there's one overarching AI that knows everything and controls everything. I think,
Right.
at least given maybe in the like medium term, I think there will be many AIs that like compete and are better at certain tasks than others. And I think that'll be, even if those AIs are controlled by centralized entities, the fact that there are many of them is better than there just being one. And so I think there will be a level of decentralization as they fight over, being best at managing your calendar or sending emails or whatever the set of tasks may be. And then I think as that develops and the like computational piece gets figured out and almost commoditized in the way that like, you can sort of like model an ASIC business today, even if it's hard to get your hands on them. Then what gets really interesting after compute is a commodity is the data layer. And so that's where Nostr comes into this, where it's like, wait, one of the theories behind why Elon made Twitter a little harder to access through API was he realized that all these like AI companies were sucking in Twitter data and benefiting from that for their algorithms. No,
Right.
I want that for, I guess, what became Grok. And so I think you're going to start seeing
Love that name.
more companies realize the value of their data for training these models, especially as it becomes as simple as like, let me just press a button and train it on my data. I think most companies today approach that as like an information security problem. It's like, well, I need to lock my data down because I can't have customer data getting out there or whatever, but it's really going to be seen as like an asset and something that can be fed into this like commoditized computing layer. As maybe the powers that be realize how futile it is to struggle against the computation piece and then move to trying to control the data that's out there on the web that can be used to control these, then something like Nostr that's more decentralized data layer becomes pretty exciting.
And explain Nostr for folks who aren't on it every day. How would you equate Nostr to?
Yeah, I think it's like, I would describe it as sort of a more decentralized social media platform. So at its core, it's a protocol. What is it? Notes and other stuff through relay, which is sort of a very understated name. Notes and other stuff.
And other stuff.
And so rather than having a centralized server, like hosted in one of these data centers controlled by Twitter or Amazon or whoever, the sort of information is propagated through these things called relays. So it creates some user experience issues where like, which relay do you trust? Which computer do you rely on for a source of truth? How many of them? So the UX still leaves something to be desired, but because it's at the protocol layer, you see people building different social media clients on top of Nostr, which is like, it's sort of like, hey, I don't like Twitter. Let me take everything from Twitter and move it to Facebook. And I think like that doesn't make sense today because Twitter and Facebook are so different.
Right.
But you've now, when you start at the protocol layer, you can define the right primitives where there's not this strange mapping of like, well, what is a like on Facebook? What does that map to? Or a friend request? How does that map to a follower? Some of these thorny questions that would exist in the Web 2 social media space, I think are easier to solve when you start at the protocol layer, even if some of the user adoption stuff is much harder. And one of the cool things is like with a tweet, you can send what's known as a zap. And so it's like, hey, I saw this post on Nostr that I like. Let me send them 5 sats as a thank you for it. And that's like native in there. And
that's all through Lightning, I take it. Yes. So fees are negligible if you're sending 5 sats. Obviously, the problem is it costs you 228 sats to send 5. Do you think, I know Lightning had so many problems in getting it up to speed where it is today? I mean, it was always like further, and a lot of people were saying like, it's just the technology, it can't be done. And obviously that's been proven wrong. Do you think Lightning is good enough for this, for the payment rail?
I think today, maybe not today, but in the near future. So it's seen, while it's still absolutely small, I think the relative growth has been pretty astounding. It's like 100x or 1,000x year over year. It's pretty insane how quickly it's grown.
I think that's only really in the last year or two, right? It was pretty sluggish since it got announced like 4 or 5 years ago or whatever. And really it's made big strides. I wonder if just the whole ordinals ecosystem, bringing new, fresh developers and a whole fresh perspective on how to use, the Bitcoin blockchain with, obviously with Taproot and SegWit before that. I wonder if that helped.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think it must have. Yeah.
So what can it sounds like the decentralized model is probably the way to go. So it's almost like, SETI's been around for what, like 20 or 30 years looking for alien life forms. And we all just, we dedicate our computing to that. That was one of the first times we had this kind of hive mind networking to solve a much greater problem, or curiosity, I should say, for humanity. Is that a good analogy for what we're looking with this GP utopia? And is it possible with each of our processor GPUs, to achieve the scale that OpenAI has?
Yes.
Or more?
Yeah. I think that is the right mental model, and I think the big missing piece there is like there's the average person, there's sort of an emotional connection to like, oh, are we alone in the universe? Like, you don't need to sell that too much. Like, it's cool, we're looking for aliens out there. um Sort of orange pilling or crypto pilling your average person on like, why does this stuff matter, I think is similarly still just like there's a marketing exercise there to do of like, wait, why does the average person care about this, about decentralization? So I think once we're able to like get that instinctual like, oh yes, I should lend some of my compute or some of my data to help train these sort of decentralized algorithms, it'll exactly be that. And then yeah, I do think we've got enough compute power that we can do this. The it There are some technical challenges to be able to like hook together the GPUs to train the model, like the more upstream computationally intensive things. You've got to like go very deep into like making your Linux drivers play well with your NVIDIA graphics card, and like there are pretty substantial technical problems to solve there.
Like, would a NUC be a good solution? Just like, that the Ethereum validators are on, where you have like kind of a dedicated thing? Or no, this is with GPUs, this is a whole different ideal machine that you're thinking about here.
Yeah. So I think it's a whole different ideal machine. I think you could start to over time see things built specifically for this task. Like it's
Right.
still a little goofy that we repurpose gaming graphics cards to run machine learning or artificial intelligence algorithms. So I think you see something like ASIC start to develop at some point. So it's like maybe an open question to me: is the technical challenge of hooking up all the spare compute worth it for the hardest, most compute intensive problems, or just the downstream part of like, hey, you've got this model that you fit somewhere, and I trust it for whatever reason. I want to be able to run this in a permissionless fashion on somebody's spare compute. There's sort of
Or fragmented on a bunch of spare ones redundantly and everything. So you're saying the once the training models are up and running and pretty solid, that is a simpler one to solve, but the training of these models is where it's still not quite there and kind of a head scratcher.
yes, yeah, and that's like uh, just because of like the different versions of a graphics card is an NVIDIA versus AMD, like uh, actually sucking in enough diverse machines and making them work together is much harder than uh, if I send a query to the AI and you send a query to the AI and we send those off to different GPUs. That's an easier problem to solve when it's just like one to one rather than all working together.
Hmm. Is do you think SETI and these other distributed computing brains had these same problems, or no, AI is kind of a level up, if you will, and it's just that much more of a difficult problem to solve?
Yeah, I think it's a similar flavor. Maybe it's like the next level in the game, in that it's like a continuation of those problems, but harder than those that came before. And I think we'll get there. I just think the community has probably not spent enough time worrying or thinking. They just maybe haven't had enough time to realize and how important this is and work on it.
Yeah. One thing you said that's interesting, because with SETI, obviously people weren't getting paid for that. But once you have microtransactions in Bitcoin, you do. And, as much as I think people want what's best for people and citizens, like even in crypto, honestly, most people don't really give a crap. It's sad to say, but most people don't care about like holding your keys and your coins. Like a lot of the people we know do, because the circles we kind of put ourselves in, more and more educated circles, but the people coming in fresh don't really know that. And the reason I bring that up is like, to me, it seems like if the decentralized is going to take off, like I always want to put a little greed and like if I knew I could buy like, and I'll call it a NUC for the validators, but I know that's not what it is, like a super fast Mac or PC or whatever with a couple GPUs in it. If I could contribute to that and it was a little annuity and I was making money on it, like it's a no-brainer. It's true though. I mean, like I'm also like, I want money for my family. I want reoccurring revenue. So when I don't have to work when I'm older, like I want to set all those things up now. Do you think we can get those pieces in place to incentivize the people, not just for altruism, but more importantly for like them making money for dedicating those resources, whatever those resources are?
Yeah, I think so. I think the big thing this hinges on, the big condition will be user demand for the decentralized tools. So I think when you go to GPU Utopia today, for example, typically there are many more people supplying their GPUs than customers demanding to use them. And so I think it'll really come. So whether this is an economically feasible thing to do in terms of like go out and actually buy a machine versus, hey, here's one I've already got and what the hell, like it's just sitting there otherwise. That'll really hinge on how much demand there is for the decentralized versions of these things.
What's keeping that demand from taking off? People, A, knowing about it, B, being into crypto and Lightning, C, it's so easy for OpenAI now to pay your $20 or whatever, get your corporate account, and then use APIs to tap into that. Like they don't see a problem yet. Or again, for decentralization and getting things in the hand of the people and not big corporations, a lot of people just don't care.
Yeah. I think it's like, it is exactly like OpenAI makes it so easy. It's $20 a month. I don't have to think about it. It's there. Maybe you'll see some people say like, oh, I'm going to test it and see, does it give me the same answer if I ask about a politician from this party versus another? And so I think people are starting to wake up a little bit to like, oh, wait, these things are maybe like less truth seeking than I'd originally imagined. But right. I think for most people in the same way that like security is a thing that most people know, I probably should care about this more than I do, but I've got a busy life and a million other things to care about, so I just don't do it. I think you sort of see the same thing here, where it's like, yeah, sure would be nice if there was a better version of OpenAI, but like, do I have the time to sit down and figure out these other things I would need to make something decentralized work? It's like, maybe not today.
Well, maybe I don't want to say that this is the big hope, but maybe seeing some of the traction from Llama being open sourced and seeing activity and people building and iterating on that, like that could be something of a catalyst when you start seeing more innovation and more things being built that are relevant and create new use cases and everything from that perspective. So it's like, after having this conversation, I'm pretty bullish on wanting to, see Llama do well. And I never thought, prior to thinking about this, that I'd be rooting for a meta AI product. But, like you kind of need to find that open source ingenuity and, then get people kind of feeding off each other of like, wow, look how this goes here, this goes there, instead of it just being, hey, this is a product that was released from essentially Microsoft OpenAI. You can use it how you want, or you can use it how we'll show you how to use it.
Yep, absolutely.
So how could people like us like get involved? People who aren't laying down the models and all that stuff. Like, is GPU Utopia or Llama like for the end user? Are they remotely as good yet? Are they even available yet? Like, what are the options out there if someone wants to branch out from OpenAI, and even if it's even not quite a good, support the decentralized AI system?
Yeah, great question. So I do think I'm pretty excited about the GPU Utopia project. I think it's gputopia.ai. I think that's a cool thing to just check out and lend some spare GPU cycles. Like that's a pretty, I think all it requires is installing like a Lightning wallet. I think Alby maybe is what they use.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, and so that's a relatively, I think, low overhead way to kind of get started contributing to the cause. I think with maybe an afternoon of work, so say a few hours, it is possible to kind of download one of these. OpenAI GPT competitor models and run it locally. I think running it locally on a machine is a big. Maybe that's the parallel or the corollary to moving your coins off an exchange sort of thing, where it's like, okay, even if
Oh,
the weights are censored or whatever, like it's not the ideal state, I've at least got it hosted on my hard drive, and I physically own that. Maybe a cool tool I would point listeners to is called Ollama, like OLLAMA, and the major innovation there is just to make it like two or three lines at the command line to download and run one of these models on your local machine. Now, to temper expectations a bit, I think both these models are not as good as GPT-4. So that's clearly the best model that's out there. So you'll see slightly worse performance today, and depending on your sort of hardware specs, like how new or old your computer is, it may be a lot slower than you're used to. But it's kind of cool to see this thing running. You can shut off the internet and still run this thing on your local machine, and there's something pretty empowering
That's
about that.
awesome.
Yeah,
yeah.
and it's like much worse than GPT-4, but it's 100 times better than anything that existed a year or two ago. And so, with the right perspective, it's pretty cool that you can run this thing on a local machine. And so, I've been personally having fun with introducing people to the combination of Ollama and then Mistral .ai. So Mistral is that company in France I mentioned earlier that has the sort of like fully uncensored open AI models. You can run that with like 2 lines of code in Ollama. Like think of Ollama as the wrapper that makes it super simple to download, set up, and run the Mistral model.
And how does the Mistral model add to the Ollama experience?
Yeah. So Ollama is almost like the wrapper that is like software that is going to make it very easy to run an arbitrary AI model. And so maybe you say, actually, I don't like Mistral for whatever reason. I would rather run Llama 2 from Facebook or one of the GPT models or whatever. So it makes it very easy to swap in and out of these different models, some of which you can download locally and others which have to be called via API. And so it just makes it super simple to call different models.
So Mistral, where does that one really shine?
Yeah, so I think it shines in just being fully like these models are mostly trained on this like open set of text, which is like everything that's on the internet and not gated. And then most of the other models that the average person could get access to then have some like censoring or sort of like moderation done to them. And so Mistral is just like fully open and sort of like uncensored.
Got it. So I assume it's one of those things where, even going from GPT 3 to 4, you kind of see like, you ask it about medical advice, and now it's a caveat before, middle, and after, like not a doctor, like go to your doctor. And you're like, just stop. Like
Yeah.
I want to know what the rash is, and I don't want to go to a doctor yet, or I want to get my own research done on this. So it's very annoying, but I think there's probably many other invisible elements that have been kind of sliced out that you don't get to see anymore. What have you noticed, especially with the government supposedly cracking down now? Have you noticed OpenAI really start to censor certain elements more than others?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, maybe in the same way the like, sort of internet, the mainstream internet zeitgeist tends to be fairly like establishment left leaning, like OpenAI, GPT-4, like has that same political bias. I think it
Hmm.
does seem to be increasing in the number of like things it will refuse to do. It's often frustrating. The medical advice one is one where it's like, wait, people have published results that like the medical advice given by GPT-4 is as good or better than medical doctors in some situations. You wouldn't want to like,
Right.
not a doctor, not giving advice, but like
Right.
in specific circumstances, it can actually outperform. And so to see that being kind of like watered down and neutered in sort of a like, cover your bases sort of approach was frustrating. One interesting thing, and I don't think this is actually like maybe like a censorship thing, but more of a user experience thing. People have documented that like Chat GPT over time has been getting like dumber, I guess, for the lack of a better word. In that like it used to give more complicated, nuanced answers, and the leading theory is that like most people don't actually want that. They want something simpler and wrong rather than like deep and nuanced. And so you now, as a user, have to jump through these hoops of like prompting it, being like, "No, hey, seriously, I really want the real
Yeah.
answer. I know what I'm."
Assume I'm a PhD from Stanford. Like ChatGPT keeps assuming they're like, well, I'll assume he's a fourth grader. Oh God, they can't handle that. Maybe a second grader. Be like, okay, tell me like I'm five, you know?
Yeah, yeah, and that's like one of those surprising sort of side effects of mass adoption is that like yeah maybe like the sort of average user is less interested in truth and nuance than like the early adopters were, and so you see it degrading over time along these dimensions.
That's wonderful. That speaks super highlights for humanity. So Mistral, it sounds like when you go into that, you, especially as you know, we've been conditioned to see less and less from the censorship of OpenAI with Mistral. It sounds like you're saying sometimes you get a response, you're like, oh wow, like you almost don't realize what you weren't getting until you get it. Now, how do you censor out? Now I'm using the word censor. Obviously, with these training models, garbage in, garbage out, right? And there's a lot of things that aren't true on the internet, whether the people who post them know they're true or not. They're just repeating things that they've been told or heard that are simply not true. How does a model do that? Is it, I assume at some point a human has to be like, no, that is definitely not right.
Yeah, and so most of these models today, especially the chat models, um, use a technique known as RLHF. So that's reinforcement learning human feedback, and so that's
Right.
essentially let me do my best to give you this answer, and then depending on how you respond to that. I can update and sort of become better over time. And so I think most of these centralized models, the way they did this was like train it on the entire text of the internet, have a bunch of internal employees like interacted with it for months and months and like say, hey, that thing is false. And then like the model would learn from that interaction with the human what to upweight and downweight. And something similar can happen with these open source models. You'll just tend to get more either false or controversial or non-mainstream things early on until you kind of help nudge it in that direction. And that's sort of the distinction between the raw weights. Like think of that as like the distillation of all the knowledge out there on the internet, whether true or not, to this like fine tuning piece where it's like I want it to know a lot about this specific area or be very good at this specific like set of tasks.
Hmm.
So
So,
almost specialization to a degree.
Yeah. And so you might want one AI that like interacts with your family, and so has a certain like warmer, more conversational tone, and then another one that's like professional and interacts with your coworkers. And the way you would do that, you could use the same model of like core truth weights and just feed it different interactions where it's like, here's how I talk at work, here's how I talk to my family, and that would end up producing a different output at the end that would be subtly different in some ways.
It's interesting. There's so many, I'm just having so many parallels, through this conversation and looking at, kind of the the development of the crypto space to a degree. So you had like, we're talking about the GPU and kind of donating that, which is kind of an equivalency to staking if you look at it from a, basic version, and then, being able to run a local AI or run an AI locally, you're almost looking at like using a cold wallet, like progressing to that step. And now when you're talking about different specialized AIs, it's almost like what we're looking at with the augment of these different blockchains. And it's like, this one might just be used for that. This is really good for this. So it's really stunning how these are just, completely exponential technologies that are really becoming more and more parallel. And I just see it all, AI crypto, you talk about like crypto Twitter and AI Twitter. It's like, they're going to come together, like that's it. It's only a matter of time till like that all kind of seems together in my mind.
Yeah, it's crypto. It's amazing how it, first you had just the internet and encryption, right? So you could have banks and stuff. But now with crypto, so many things on top of that, like you said, Disco, were not possible until if you don't have the payment rails and clean payment rails that are almost frictionless and costless, you can't do all these microtransactions that are so important to fractionalizing this hive mind of kind of citizenry banding together to make sure we've got powerful tools that aren't just censored by kind of the big guys out there, the big corporations. So that's a great point.
Yeah, maybe one parallel on Disco's sort of metaphor there. If in 2021 my family was sort of looking at me straight as I punched out the metal letters representing my seed phrase and sort of like buried it in this fireproof case, they look at me the same way when I'm like buying GPUs and storing them. Like, why do you have so many GPUs at the house, kind of thing? And so there's like there's a long tail of how deep you can get into this stuff. I think.
So like with Llama and Mistral, can you, being in this business for 10 years, can you start layering on top of that for you, like you said, to make one more for your family that's more friendly? That's almost like, it almost feels like that aunt that everybody loved and that relative more specific to you. So it sounds like that's a big yes for someone as knowledgeable as you. Is that for people like Disco and I who are fairly tech savvy, but obviously we're not coders, is that going to be, if we start playing with these, accessible to us to start fine tuning for specific tasks?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for fairly technical listeners, there's a set of Python libraries known as LangChain, LangChain. And this is almost like, you can sort of think of them as a lot of like small tools to hook up to various pieces of the AI stack that you might like. So one popular one is like, just hook my AI model up to my Gmail account, like suck in all my Gmail data and then like respond to emails for me. This is like, with someone who can write code, this is fairly straightforward to do. I think there are even sort of like non-technical solutions that exist that non-technical folks could use today. The only thing I'd caution people about is like, be very careful about if you're building that tool and sort of like know the model and where the data is being stored. Like be very careful of like, in the same way you wouldn't reveal your seed phrase, like giving full control of your email inbox or your personal text or anything like that, like to an AI model. That company is making money somewhere. And so just be a little suspicious before you hand these things over. But that technology absolutely exists today. And I think it will increasingly become common that you're sort of able to do these things in low code or no code ways.
Wow. This has been pretty mind blowing. Disco,
Yeah.
have we covered everything that you want to discuss here?
I think, yeah, I didn't expect some of the developments, and now I have a little punch list of things to check out post show, which is always, always fun. It's as if there were, another half a dozen rabbit holes created that I can now explore and get into. But I guess my kind of wrap is like, there are synergies, and I hate to use that, but it just does seem very
synergy.
parallel. I know.
Strike one.
But I do see it. I do see it evolving in similar ways, and I do see it ultimately really coming together and supporting each other. And I think that what's important to really look at is trying to have some voice or articulation of the narrative and not let it get out of the way. Because, you can't go on CNBC and not hear AI, 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 and it's all these
Right.
idiots, like every single company's like, well, when we lean into our AI feed, it's like, dude, I got it. But you just kind of saw that with, crypto a couple of years ago, and then it kind of went dark and, build. Now it feels a little bit like, kind of crypto's ready to, have another go at it and be, more adopted from that perspective. Like that bear kind of helped to build some of this. And I wonder if AI jumped out so fast that it almost needs a little bit of like a regroup. And hopefully in this regrouping, so to speak, you can have more of a focus on the open source. And that's kind of where I'm leaning from this conversation.
Yeah, well said, Disco. Well said. Well, Dr. G, thank you so much. This has been enlightening. As Disco said, this show's all about decentralization. And when you reached out, you're like, you guys have to look at AI. We were obviously finance is the obvious one, and education, government, and once you said AI, I'm like, oh, duh. It's like skate to where the puck's going, not to where it's been and where, because social media is already the algorithms have already kind of concretized. I'm making these stupid words up. They've already solidified, but with AI, we still, just like with crypto, like if we all organize together, we've got a chance to really help shape it and keep it, open for the people. And it sounds like maybe with decentralization, maybe it doesn't matter what we do, it will just happen naturally. But I'd like to think we can push that to the things that are important for decentralization like this. So thank you, A, for listening, B, for reaching out and be like, hey, I got an idea for you guys. And C, I'm like, oh, how about 3 days from now? You're like, how about it? Let's do it. So this was fascinating. And yeah, like Disco said, the more rabbit holes we go down, we're like, oh, I understand that now. And then there's 73 sub holes like, all right, well, let's just keep diving and keep learning. So this has been absolutely fascinating. So thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. I definitely feel the like trying to keep a foot in both of these spaces, the AI and crypto spaces, like so many rabbit holes to just like it fills up infinite time, but it's exciting. Yeah, and I do think the decentralization piece is inevitable. To your point, I think what we all have a chance to do is just influence the timelines. Like inevitability could be 100 years away, or it could be much faster than this.
Right.
And all of us and the listeners have a chance to shape that and accelerate these timelines.
And cool. If someone wanted to follow you and learn more and get all the insights that you have, where would they go?
Yeah, probably Twitter is the best place. I'm somewhat active on there. It's just Dr. G __123. And always love meeting people in either of these spaces or just generally doing interesting things.
Was that Dr. G _?
Double underscore, yeah.
You couldn't get single _123. You had to get double underscore.
Yeah.
I love it.
Pivot to pseudonymous was fairly rushed. So yeah, work in progress.
All right. Well,
I like it.
Yeah. Thanks so much. We appreciate your time. That was fascinating.
Thanks, guys.